The temperature in Sudbury had dropped to -26 by midnight, and Master Corporal Reeve Dunbar had been counting each degree like a countdown. She had survived 2 tours, one in Latvia, one in Mali, and neither of them had broken her the way this particular February was trying to. 9 months of running, and now a concrete drainage culvert beneath the Lawn Street overpass, her toque pulled so low it covered her eyebrows, her jacket draped over the trembling animal in her lap. Flint was dying. She could feel it in the way his breathing had changed, shallow now, arrhythmic, the way a clock sounds when the mechanism is finally going. The Belgian Malinois had weighed 54 pounds at his peak, coiled muscle and restless intelligence, the kind of dog that could track a heat signature through a snowdrift or locate a buried pressure plate at 30 meters in a crosswind. He had been decorated twice. He had saved 11 lives that Reeve knew of personally, and probably more she'd never counted. Now he weighed 40 pounds. His ribs showed through his coat like fence slats. His amber eyes were half closed and glassy, and when Reeve pressed her bare palm against his flank, she could feel his heart stuttering. "Hey," she said it close to his ear, the way she always did. "I've got you, Flint. You hear me? I've got you." He didn't lift his head. He hadn't lifted his head in 2 days. They had been moving for 9 months. 3 provinces, 14 temporary shelters, more nights under open sky than Reeve could reconstruct from memory. She hadn't used a bank card since May. She hadn't seen a doctor. She had taken construction shifts under a false name in Timmins for 3 weeks and spent every dollar on kibble and black market amoxicillin, and kept walking north. To the Canadian forces, she was an unauthorized absentee and a thief. She had removed a classified government asset, K9 Unit FLT-09, registered working dog, property of national defense without authorization. To Reeve, she had saved her best friend's life. Or she had tried to. The flashback always came at night, when she was too tired to keep it out. It had been November, CFB Petawawa, a training exercise on the South Range. Flint had been running a perimeter sweep when a legacy anti-personnel mine, supposedly cleared, supposedly documented, definitely not, detonated 8 meters off his path. The blast wave threw him 4 meters sideways into a frozen ditch. When Reeve reached him, he was conscious, but his left rear leg was shattered at the femur, and he wasn't responding to sound on his left side. The base vet, Captain Ellie Rowe, had been honest with Reeve in the way that people are honest when they're actually kind. Flint would walk again with proper rehabilitation. His hearing would likely never fully recover. He would not be cleared for active deployment. Colonel Iron Strut had been less honest and considerably less kind. He had delivered the decommission order the following morning, reading it from a clipboard without looking at her. K9 FLLT-09 had been evaluated and classified as non-serviceable. Euthanasia was scheduled for the following Tuesday. The decision had been made on the grounds that maintaining non-deployable working dogs represented an unacceptable resource expenditure. Reeve had requested the adoption pathway. The CF had a formal process. Handlers could apply to take retired dogs home. Strutt had denied it without lifting his eyes from the clipboard. FLLT-09's training classification and residual behavioral unpredictability post-injury made civilian transfer inadvisable. The matter was closed. That Sunday night, Reeve had cut the fence on the south side of the kennels, wrapped Flint's leg in the best field dressing she had, loaded him into a borrowed truck, and driven north until the fuel gauge hit empty. She had not looked back once. Until now, sitting in a drainage culvert in -26 degrees, she was starting to understand what looking back actually felt like. A pair of shoes appeared at the culvert entrance. Not boots, orthopedic shoes, brown leather old, but carefully polished, the kind a person maintains out of habit because they were raised to believe shoes said something about character. Reeve did not move. "We're not causing any trouble. We'll be gone before first light." "I'm not concerned about trouble," said a voice above her. It was male, very old, and carrying the particular unhurried quality of someone who had spent decades speaking in rooms where people were required to listen. "I'm concerned about that dog's breathing." Reeve looked up. The man standing at the culvert entrance was somewhere past his mid-80s. He was slight, almost bird-like, but his posture was perfectly upright, the posture that doesn't come from genetics but from decades of deliberate practice. He wore a heavy navy wool overcoat and a flat tweed cap, and he was leaning on a wooden walking stick with a brass cap at the base. His eyes, behind wire-rimmed glasses, were the color of lake ice in March, grey-blue and very clear. "His breathing is fine," Reeve said, the lie she'd been telling herself for 3 days. "His breathing is not fine," the old man said simply. "I can hear it from here. I could hear it from the end of the block." He crouched slowly, with effort but without complaint, and studied Flint the way a person looks at something they recognize. Belgian Malinois, 7 or 8 years old, that's a working dog tactical harness, and those are CF issue identification tags, which means you are not a civilian. He paused. "My name is Walter Hatch. I live 4 blocks from here, and if you don't come with me right now, that dog will not survive the night, and neither, frankly, will you." He looked at Flint for a long moment, and something shifted in his expression. Not pity, but something older and more serious than pity. "I know what a canine tactical harness looks like, Corporal. My son wore one for 14 years. Come inside." Reeve looked at Flint. His eyes found hers, just barely. The amber had gone almost grey at the edges, the light in them like a candle burning behind smoked glass. She picked him up. 40 pounds of failing dog felt like the full weight of 9 months as Reeve staggered upright and followed the old man out of the culvert and into the blizzard. Walter Hatch's house on Mackenzie Street was a red brick 2-story that had been standing since 1931 and looked like it intended to stand for another century. The front hallway was warm the way old houses are warm, not the sharp heat of a furnace kicking on, but something deeper, accumulated, the warmth of decades of fires in the same hearth. A grandfather clock ticked in the hall with the weight of something important, and the walls were hung with framed photographs and legal citations in polished frames. "Lay him on the mat by the radiator," Walter said, already moving toward the kitchen with a steadiness that belied his age. "Not directly on the grate. Slowly." Reeve knelt and set Flint down. The dog let out a long, slow exhale as the warmth reached him, a sound so close to relief that Reeve had to press her mouth against her forearm for a moment before she could straighten. Walter returned with a bowl of beef soup, a mug of tea, and a shallow plate of plain boiled chicken. "Small amounts," he said. "Both of you." Reeve fed Flint first. Pinched pieces of chicken, one at a time, watching his nose twitch and then his tongue appear, slowly, then with more conviction. He ate 6 pieces before his head dropped back to the mat. 6 pieces was more than he'd managed in 2 days. Reeve drank the soup standing up. "Sit," Walter said. She sat. He settled into the armchair across from her, his walking stick across his knees, and looked at her the way a man looks at something he's already made a decision about. "You're going to tell me I shouldn't have run," Reeve said. "No," Walter said. "I'm going to tell you that you have no idea what you've been running from." Reeve went still. "There's envelope on the table to your left," Walter said. "Open it." She reached for it. It was a standard manila envelope but heavy, thick with pages. She broke the seal. The top page was a photocopy of a national defense 7 months prior. At the top, in bold type, CF Logistics Directive, decommissioned equipment, priority recall, asset FLT 9. Below it, underlined in red ink by someone's hand, retrieve by any means necessary, handler location, active search. Not find her, not locate the dog, retrieve by any means necessary. "This isn't about Flint going AWOL," Reeve said. Her voice came out quieter than she intended. No, Walter said, it never was. He leaned forward, hands folded over his walking stick. 3 weeks before the incident on the South Range, your unit was called in to support a CDS-level security exercise at a secondary logistics compound near Petawawa. The exercise was classified. None of the handlers were given the full scenario. Flint was deployed to run a routine sweep of the compound storage bays. He paused. In Bay 7, Flint alerted on a locked shipping crate. The supervising officer, Colonel Ian Strutt, immediately called off the sweep and classified the bay. The exercise was declared complete. You were debriefed and released. Reeve remembered it. A cold October night, floodlights on gravel, Flint moving ahead on the long lead. What neither you nor Strutt's supervising officer knew, Walter continued, is what happened in the 90 seconds before Strutt arrived. Your dog didn't just alert on that crate. He found a gap in a damaged corner seal, and he retrieved an object from inside. Walter met her eyes steadily. Flint is trained to swallow small retrieved objects in hostile environments rather than drop them. It is a fail-safe behavior. Reeve knew that. She had trained it herself. The object he swallowed was a CF issue encrypted data capsule. Titanium casing, Class 5. It was secured to the interior wall of the crate. Walter's voice dropped half a register. That capsule contains the complete transaction record of a black market arms diversion scheme that Colonel Strutt has been running for 4 years. Decommissioned CF equipment, weapons systems, communications hardware, vehicle components, rerouted through a Shell logistics contractor before the scrapping facility. Sold internationally. The capsule was kept by Strutt's logistics partner as insurance against him in case things went wrong between them. He paused. When it disappeared from the crate, Strutt assumed his partner had moved it. It took him 2 weeks and a forensic review of compound security footage to realize what had actually happened. The fireplace crackled. The clock ticked. He didn't schedule the euthanasia because Flint couldn't be deployed anymore, Reeve said. No, Walter said. He scheduled it because a dog euthanized quietly on base could be autopsied without anyone asking questions. A titanium capsule recovered from the stomach contents of a non-serviceable working dog could be destroyed without a trace, and no one would think to ask why. He held her gaze. When you took Flint off that base, Reeve, you didn't steal government property. You walked out with the only piece of evidence that can put a serving CF colonel in federal prison. She set the envelope down. Her hands were trembling and she let them. How do you know all of this? Walter reached into his coat pocket and produced a folded page, a photocopy of a legal document, signed and witnessed. The letterhead read Office of the Chief Justice, Ontario Superior Court of Justice, retired. 31 years on the bench, he said. My last 5 years I presided over cases involving national defense. Strutt appeared before my court 11 years ago, a lesser misconduct charge, later withdrawn under pressure from above. I couldn't prove what I suspected then. I kept the file. He replaced the document. When I retired, I kept watching. When Strutt's logistics partner was arrested on an unrelated charge 8 months ago, and certain documents came into circulation, I was quietly provided copies by someone who trusted my discretion. I have been waiting for something to break this case open. I did not expect it to crawl into a culvert 4 blocks from my front door. Reeve looked toward the hallway. Flint had shifted slightly, his nose pressed against the base of the radiator, chasing the heat. He's been sick for months, she said. I thought it was the injury, the malnutrition. It isn't. Walter rose, crossed to the side table, and returned with a manila folder. Inside was a black and white radiographic image, veterinary, clearly recent. He laid it on the coffee table between them. The capsule was immediately visible. A dense white rectangle lodged in the mid-abdomen, bright against the grey field of surrounding tissue. The titanium casing cannot be digested, Walter said, and it is too large to pass naturally. It has been creating a partial obstruction for 9 months. The resulting toxicity is what has been damaging his organs. His voice was matter of fact but not cold, the tone of a man who had learned long ago that hard truths delivered gently are still hard truths. If the capsule is not removed surgically tonight, Flint will not survive the week. Reeve pressed the heel of her hand against her mouth. For 9 months, every decision she had made, every risk she had taken, every shift she had worked under a false name in a northern town, all of it had been in service of the belief that she was protecting him. And all that time, the thing killing him had been inside him, invisible, and she had carried him 9 months across 3 provinces without knowing. "We need a vet," she said when she could speak again, "a real one. But if I take him anywhere public, they'll scan his chip." "Already arranged," Walter said. He reached out and pulled a velvet cord on the wall beside the bookcase. A door at the back of the hallway opened. A man in his mid-60s came through it, checked flannel shirt beneath a sterile blue surgical drape, a hard-sided steel case in one hand. His face had the look of someone who had spent years working outdoors and then more years under fluorescent lights, and both histories were written in the lines around his eyes. "Reeve Dunbar," Walter said. "This is Dr. Gord Pelletier. He served as senior veterinary surgeon at CFB Gagetown for 18 years. He has a sterile field set up downstairs, and he owes me a debt that I am now calling in. I would trust him with my own life." Dr. Pelletier looked at Reeve, then at Flint. His expression was careful and professional. "How long has he been showing the abdominal symptoms?" 6 months, Reeve said, and the words felt like a confession. He nodded. "Bring him down. We don't have much of a window." Reeve lifted Flint from the mat. The dog stirred, turned his face toward her neck, and she held him there for a moment, her cheek pressed to the top of his head, breathing him in. The smell of him, iron and warmth and something that had no name in any language she spoke, the specific scent of an animal who had been beside her through everything that mattered. "I'm here," she said quietly. "I'm not going anywhere." The basement bore no resemblance to a basement. Stainless steel work surface, surgical lamps on articulated arms, a cardiac monitor against the far wall. Dr. Pelletier was already at the scrub sink. "You'll need to wait upstairs," he said without turning around. "I'll stay." "Corporal," his voice was kind and absolute. "If you are in this room, half my concentration will go to managing your reactions instead of doing the work. Go upstairs. The moment it's done, you'll hear from me." Reeve pressed 2 fingers once to Flint's paw, the particular pressure she had always used before sending him into an unknown space, the signal that meant, "I see you, I'm here, go," and walked back up the stairs. The main floor was dark except for the fire. She stood in the parlor, unable to sit, and moved to the wall of photographs she had not had time to look at when they arrived. Military portraits, not Walter, but a younger man in CF dress uniform. Shoulder patches she recognized, K9 unit. Dogs at his feet in several of them. A shepherd, a retriever, a Malinois. The rank progressed across the photographs from lieutenant to captain to major. His son. And in the center of the wall, a smaller frame, a shadow box. Inside it, a set of dog tags, a battered CF identification clip, and a photograph of a man and a dog in field kit somewhere flat and sun-bleached and not Canadian, both of them squinting into light that had no mercy in it. The date below the tags was 4 years ago. Reeve stood in front of that shadow box for a long time. She didn't hear the east side conservatory window give. She felt the change in air pressure, the slight temperature shift that told her a point of entry had been opened somewhere behind the wall. She moved without thinking. "Walter," she said it quietly, stepping into the parlor doorway, "get behind the fireplace, right now." Walter looked up from his chair. He read her face, set his book down without a word, and moved. Reeve killed the only lamp still burning. In the dark, she listened. The intruder was good. No flashlight, soft soles, movement that was nearly, but not entirely, soundless on the hardwood floor. Nearly 9 months of sleeping in places where any sound could mean the end had calibrated Reeve's hearing to a pitch she hadn't known she was capable of. She tracked him through the conservatory, down the back hall, toward the parlor. She needed to change the terms. Walter's grandfather clock stood at the end of the hall, tall dark walnut, the pendulum weights hanging on iron chains inside the case. Reeve reached it in 3 steps and released the chain. The weights dropped. The crash hit every wall in the house like a concussion round. The intruder spun toward the sound. Reeve was already moving. She came at him from the side and drove her forearm into his throat before he could bring the weapon up, and they hit the wall together hard enough to crack plaster. The suppressed rifle skittered across the floor. He was bigger than her and recently fed and operating on full night vision optics. She was 9 months starved and running on the specific kind of fury that does not burn out. They fought through the dark parlor, upending a side table, going through a standing lamp, books and glass across the floor. He got a forearm across her chest and drove her into the bookcase, and she came back off it with an elbow to the bridge of his nose. He got both hands around her wrist and wrenched. "Strutt sends his regards," he said, his voice flat and controlled. "Tell him yourself," Reeve said, and drove her knee up. He doubled. She got behind him. She had him in a chokehold, bending him backward, and he was fighting it, genuinely fighting it, when the room went bright. Not the lights, a muzzle flash. A Browning high power fired in a plaster-walled Victorian parlor is not a quiet thing under any circumstances. The sound hit the walls and came back, and hit them again. The intruder went heavy in Reeve's arms. She lowered him to the floor. Walter Hatch stood 6 feet away. He was holding a CF-issue Browning with both hands extended, his posture the posture of someone who learned to shoot at a time when learning properly was the only option. His flat tweed cap was slightly pushed back. Everything else about him was completely steady. "That was my son's service pistol," Walter said, in the same unhurried voice he had used on the street. "He would have wanted it used." He lowered the weapon. His hands, Reeve noticed, were not shaking. The intercom on the parlor wall crackled. "Corporal Dunbar," Dr. Pelletier's voice came through, tired and steady. "Surgery is complete. The capsule is out. He is stable and recovering from the anesthetic. Come down when you're ready." Reeve sat down on the floor among the scattered books. What came out of her then was not something she had words for. 9 months of running, compressed into perhaps 30 seconds of release, and she did not try to manage it or shorten it or make it less than it was. It was ugly and honest, and it had been waiting a long time. Walter crossed the room and sat on the arm of the nearest chair. Close enough that she was not alone, far enough that he was not intruding. He said nothing. Sometimes 87 years of living teaches a person that silence is the only right answer. The titanium capsule was delivered to the office of the chief military judge the following morning, bypassing every chain of command that Colonel Strutt had spent 4 years carefully cultivating. The encrypted data it contained was decrypted within 72 hours by the Canadian Forces Information Operations Group. The transaction records were complete. 41 months, $23 million in diverted equipment, 3 separate international buyers. Strutt was arrested at his desk at NDHQ in Ottawa on a Thursday. He was court-martialed, stripped of his rank, and sentenced to 38 years in federal penitentiary on charges of fraud against the Crown, illegal arms trafficking, and conspiracy to commit murder. His logistics partner received 22. The request for Reeve's pardon moved through channels with unusual speed. Walter Hatch had spent 31 years on the bench acquiring a significant number of people who owed him their professional lives, and he was not above reminding them of this at the appropriate moment. On a Tuesday morning in late March, Reeve stood in the front parlor of the house on Mackenzie Street and read a letter from the Deputy Minister of National Defence. 3 paragraphs. The important one was the second, which reinstated her rank, acknowledged her service record without qualification, and restored full pay and medical benefits retroactive to the date of her departure. She set the letter down on the coffee table. Beside it was a second document, a single printed page bearing the crest of National Defence and a signature in blue ink. Authorization of transfer, CF Working Dog FLT09 to Master Corporal Reeve Dunbar, permanently, effective immediately. Flint was on the rug by the fire. He had been on the rug by the fire for 6 weeks, recovering with the aggressive single-mindedness of a working dog who found rest professionally humiliating, but was willing to tolerate it, given the circumstances. He had put on 11 pounds. His coat had gone glossy again. He had begun following Walter around the house 2 weeks ago, a habit that Walter maintained he found inconvenient, and which he very clearly did not find inconvenient. Walter came in from the kitchen and set a mug of tea on the table, without asking if she wanted it. He looked at Flint. Flint looked at him, the dog's tail swept once across the rug. "You'll want to get settled somewhere before spring," Walter said. "There's good country east of Sudbury if you don't mind the drive." Reeve looked at the documents on the table, then at Flint, then at the wall where the shadow box still hung, the dog tags, the field photograph, the name she now knew by heart. "I'm not in a hurry," she said. Walter looked at her, and something in his expression went quiet. The way things go quiet when a decision has already been made but simply hasn't been spoken yet. "There are 3 empty bedrooms in this house," he said. "Dr. Pelletier's back has been giving him trouble, and he could use someone to take over his morning rounds. And that dog," he nodded toward Flint, who had relocated his chin to Walter's left foot, "appears to have already made his preference known." Reeve looked at the old judge, who had walked into a blizzard at midnight for a stranger and a dog, who had kept a son's service pistol oiled and ready in a cabinet she hadn't noticed until it was in his hands, who had spent 11 years building a case in the quiet, patient way that people build things meant to last. She picked up the transfer document and folded it into her jacket. "I'll need a few days to clear my things," she said. "I don't have many." "No rush," Walter said, and went back to the kitchen. Flint lifted his head from the old man's foot, watched the doorway, and then set it back down in exactly the same spot. Reeve sat on the rug beside him the way she always had, cross-legged, her hand resting on his ribs, feeling the slow, steady rise and fall of a dog who had carried more than he should ever have been asked to carry, for longer than she'd known. "We made it," she said quietly. Flint exhaled. Outside, the March ice was beginning to crack in the gutters along Mackenzie Street, the long Sudbury winter finally deciding it had made its point.